I hope everybody had a great week and a terrific weekend. Got your rest and everything. I had an emergency and I had to drive up north, and that's not as much fun as it'd be nice to remember it as being. All right, don't. Oh well, you do what you got to do, and things worked out for the most part pretty decently. So that was good. I hope everybody is doing well in the course so far. This week, we're going to be talking about prehistorical art from Europe mostly and Oceania, the Polynesian cultures. There is there's somebody I wanted to introduce you to that I thought had a really fascinating take on cave art, and then your assignment for this week is to try to make some of your own. Let's see if I can find. Pretty sure I put her video in here, but I'm not seeing. Oh, there we go. Okay, at the end of the page, Prehistory Part 1 Cave Paintings, at the very bottom of it, you will see a link to a video from Dr. Genevieve von Pensinger. I would recommend very highly watching that. Um, in fact, if you do decide to watch it, when you fill out your form for attendance, let me know that you had watched it and tell me one thing you learned about what she had to say that you thought was interesting, and you will get 2 extra credit points on the attendance thing. Again, if you watch the video, and that video is at the bottom of the prehistory page that says at the that has the title Cave Paintings. Now, why is that so important? Okay, well, when we're talking about history, and this is actually important to art and art context, when we're talking about history, that gives us a frame of reference for understanding. It gives us a framework to stack the information that we have so we can begin to process it, so we can hopefully understand it. It's a categorization system. As humans, one of the things that we insist on doing, just regardless of what the situation is we try very hard to give order and organization to whatever we observe or experience. That process, one word for it is pareidolia. So when we look at things that have happened before the present moment, we refer to that as history. Albert Einstein said that time is an illusion, albeit a persistent one. And it's what is interesting to me is that most of the ways that we have kind of fabricated to keep track of history are illusions, with the assumption being that whatever has happened to inevitably lead to wherever the observer or recorder of the history is standing. What I mean is, stuff happens around the world all the time, but how it affects you makes it important to you, and that's how we view our history. It's not everything that's ever happened, and not even every important thing that's ever happened. It's just the things that we feel, whoever's writing the history, are important, organized in a way that makes sense, so that the information points to us. And that's pretty much what it is. History as a sense for body of knowledge, if we're talking about that, history has to exist in a space where information can be recorded and shared. That people who weren't alive at the time that the history was recorded can still access it. Now, that typically happens with writing. So when we talk about something like prehistory, when we use that phrase, we're talking about a time on the planet before writing. But it also means before record keeping. There are a number of cultures that have spoken word record keeping. For example, the indigenous peoples of Australia have spoken word traditions where their record keeping goes back to record an astronomical event that happened some 50,000 years ago. The griots of Mali and Ghana and that area, they were people after the order of Homer who would memorize entire contracts and genealogical lines and stories that would fill volumes. And when they were being written down by later colonizers, they were filling volumes. I mean, these people would essentially remember entire books so they could entertain an audience by reciting history to them. So, but before those things happened, before people had any way to keep track of things and make a record that other people could access, then we call that prehistory. So essentially we're looking, prehistory is going to be before written language, before structured language. Now the oldest writing, it really depends on what people are finding and what they're cataloging as writing. But generally, people can believe that the oldest writing is about 5,400 years old, about 34 to 3,300, 3,300 to 3,400 BC. And it was appeared first, apparently, in Mesopotamia. Now, there were also other contemporaries around them. Right after that, about that time, within a couple hundred years, consistent writing appeared in Egypt. The Indus River Valley, there's a hint that there might have been some writing there as well. The ancient Chinese had a way of kind of resolving issues by carving bones with symbols and then heating the bones up and reading the cracks. That looks like there's potentially might have been writing there, but it doesn't really count so much because there isn't a large enough sampling for anybody to make a verified translation of what the symbols are. To be able to translate a language, you need a big enough sample that after you're convinced that you've translated a section or you understand a section, you can apply what you've learned to another section of the writing and still have it make sense. Otherwise, it's essentially coincidence. So we're talking 5,400 years ago. Now, considering that that's about the time of the Egyptian pyramids, that's about the time that a lot of these major civilizations around the world show up, then that seems to kind of make sense. Then later on, a little bit more recently, we see more widespread evidence of writing throughout China, about 1,000 years, 1 to 2,000 years closer to us, and only about 26 to 3,000 years ago, 2,600 to 3,000 years ago, we see fantastical writing showing up in the Americas, in Mesoamerica. The Maya had, I think, the most fascinating writing system because they were real artists. Instead of using letters like we're familiar with, they drew little pictures. And those pictures are a lot of the times called hieroglyphs, because the hieroglyph is symbolic writing that is associated with spiritual things. That's why it's called hieroglyph. Now, the Maya, and I got this from a friend of mine who translates ancient Mayan. He said that a word symbol may sound like the language, so it serves the purpose of letters. It may sound like a word that is similar to the word that's intended, so like a synonym, a homonym. It could be a picture of something that is associated with the word that's intended. Like if you want to write something about nighttime, then you have an image of the moon. So the word is not moon, even though that's what's written. The word is actually supposed to be nighttime because it's associated to moon. And then there were other things that he said it's really hard to decipher without the context, because the same symbol could mean 4 or 5 different things in different contexts, and the exact same word could be symbolized by any of a dozen different images depending on the context. So a very complicated writing system that was intended to, I think, both entertain and separate the nobility out from the rest of the population that were not literate. And sometimes that's what you see with writing. The more fanciful or the more fancy and artistic writing is, the more complicated it may be to understand. Interestingly, the person who is credited with bringing education and literacy to ancient Egypt was a king who's known as the Scorpion King. And of course, if any of you guys remember the mummy movies, the Scorpion King was played by Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. So, that guy who was all tough and rumble was a pharaoh that doubled as a teacher. Now, so looking before history, before language, that's when we start looking into things like cave painting, where we're pretty sure that people were recording important events, but the cave painting themselves don't have a consistent enough symbol system to be able to qualify as a language. Because even though they were recording something that other people could read, other people who came around could not understand it unless they were familiar with that culture already. And that kind of separates it out from a typical writing system. Now, Dr. Genevieve, whose video I want you to watch, she did a survey of many caves throughout Europe and found out that between 17,000 and 50,000 years ago, our ancestors living in Europe recorded almost 36 consistently used symbols. Is that it's almost like an alphabet. It's not quite, because we don't know what the meaning of the symbols are, but it's consistent enough that it's almost eerie. Now, what is really fascinating to me is that any place on the planet where there's human habitation, if they were near a place, if the humans that were there were near a place that was permanent, like a rock wall or a cave, they would leave a record. And petroglyphs in the Americas, you can go to the Fremont Park north of here and see really, really old petroglyphs. And there's other examples of petroglyphs around here. There's also cave art in Oklahoma, that just North America. You go to South America, and there's many places there too, where there's a lot of this evidence that human beings had been there a long time ago. In Australia, there's cave art. In the continent of Africa, I'm thinking particularly Zimbabwe, there's a lot of cave art. Some of that was cool enough that when Picasso and his roommate Brock saw it, some historians believe that inspired them to begin the process that led to Cubism. Now I'm going to share my screen so you can see what I'm scrolling through. Oh, hey, Nicola.
How's it going, Professor?
All right, I'm glad you showed up. Chime in when you want to, and feel free to ask a question. Let's see, I'm trying to share my screen now. All right, here we go. So we've just been talking about what prehistory means and what things look like before writing. And you can see here's a Chauvet Cave in France. They have identified these as lions, but if you look at this, look at the profile of that lion. This drawing is 35,000 years old. Now, a lot of the times people will look at art from our ancestors and dismiss it as saying they weren't smart enough to do anything realistically. Nicoa, where my mouse is circling on that face right there, and this face to the right, face to the left, and then these faces on the edge, do those look naturalistic to you? To me, they look like they were drawn yesterday.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah, and it's proof that our ancestors were just as smart as we are. And if they drew or painted something that did not look naturalistic or realistic, it was because they intended it to look the way it is, not because they didn't know how. This is 35,000 years old, and it looks like something that you'd see out of a comic book. I mean, that is just amazing. And it's even more realistic than a lot of comic books that are being done today. So, as I was saying, Genevieve went to several of these caves and found lots of consistency with the way our ancestors recorded things. This particular image is from Indonesia. So there's a lot of really old cave paintings in Indonesia, India, and China. I was just reading an article earlier today where somebody says that they feel that there's evidence of pre-human occupation. So people that were our ancestors but were not recognized as modern humans living and making cave art in India and China as far back as maybe 400,000 years ago, if you can believe that. Now, present humans, our contemporary humans, are made up of three races of pre-humans cultures, or pre-human species. They are the Neanderthal, which you've heard about, the Cro-Magnon, which you've heard about, and the Denisovan, which you probably haven't heard about. The Denisovans have been found in Russia. The Cro-Magnon were found in France, and the Neanderthal were found in Germany. And it's interesting to me, when I was growing up, we were told that when these groups met each other, they would kill each other until, you know, whoever the winners were, they would survive, and the winners were the ones that went on to create modern humans. But with the genetic testing that's been done, the genetics that have been done, it's shown that people today have a mix of all three of those cultures, or all three of those groups of pre-humans, the Cro-Magnon, Neanderthal, and Denisovans, which means that instead of hating each other's guts, when these groups met, they actually started living together. And I think that's a much more hopeful view of the potential for humanity. So that was in Indonesia, and then there's other caves as well. There's some caves found in Argentina. There's also caves that have been found in Southeast Asia, and a lot of other places too. It seems, like I said, this is South Africa. In almost every place where humans are in evidence of living near a structure that was permanent, like a cave, they would leave a record. And the ones that survived, the ones that are ones that people would go deep inside the cave to leave them. And one of the reasons I think why we don't see more of these around is because human beings, we not everybody goes spelunking. And I think that's the only reason why more of these haven't been seen. I want to share some of this with you. Now, Nicole, if you could tell me whether or not volume shows up, I would appreciate it. Oh, that says we can't get that one. Let me see if I can link it somehow.
I feel like I'm dealing with what seems like a never-ending stream.
Okay, I'm showing this tab. Let's see if I can get to the video. All right, can you see this video, Nicola?
Yeah, I see it.
Okay.
And I can hear it too.
Okay, excellent. And we're just going to watch a little bit of it.
There's something in the world, a place of bend.
Okay, now you can start seeing that there's red spots. That is an indicator of either iron oxides or cave painting, and they would use iron oxide to help paint. And she's talking about she and her husband going through this area. Her husband is the documentary photographer for the project. But this, the height of this is only a couple feet. So somehow our ancestors, it was important enough that their images were sheltered, that they went through areas like this, that I don't know about you guys, but this kind of close quarters just scares the bejeebers out of me. And then we start seeing these images. She says 10 to 40,000 years ago. Now this is a very stylized elk, but it is very clearly an elk. Now the interesting thing about these fingers, there was an ethnographer who did just a statistical research study where he found out that for men, this forefinger is shorter than the ring finger. I'm sorry, is longer. The ring finger here is longer than the forefinger. And for women, the majority of samples, the women, these fingers are almost always the same length. So the ring finger and the pointer finger are almost the same length in women. What he discovered is by looking at Dr. von Pensinger's images and all the other images of these kinds of handprints on cave paintings, he found out that over 2/3 of them were done by women. Which means if 2/3 of those handprints were done by women, there's a good chance that 2/3 of all the cave paintings we see were done by women. Isn't that interesting? Okay, now she talks about 3 different kinds of communication and writing. The one on the left represents vocal sounds. That's where we get in written language, that's the alphabet. The second is hand signals in written language. That's where we get rebus. A rebus is like a little drawing that is intended to look like something else directly. Hieroglyphs are very reminiscent of this. And then the third one is literature, where people are combining, are writing the language sounds down in such a way that the sounds themselves have not an awful lot to do with the meaning, but the meaning is translated through those sounds connected as words. So that's what the difference between those things is. And then look at this. We have human beings walking. Yes, some of these are distorted. That is true. But you can also see, if you guys have done your gestural drawing class, you see a lot of gestural drawing on this. I don't know if this was ever intended as anything other than a practice wall, or maybe people were trying to draw things specifically and they did it in a stylized way. We see these dots kind of showing up. They suggest maybe there's calendrical, it has to do with the calendar keeping. Has anybody been to the rock art sites in Utah? Nicole, have you seen any of the petroglyph sites?
No, I've never been.
Well, if you do get a chance, there's a couple areas that are relatively close by. A lot of that people think aren't very old, but some of it is really old. And I think that to determine the age of it, they're going to have to get a forensic geologist to actually determine. But if you get a chance to go to the Fremont site or the Parowan Gap, there's some really amazing stuff, and you can see a lot of connection with what we're seeing here. You know, the hands, but you also get hatching in boxes. So these do not look like, except for the hands, these do not look like they're intended to be images of something. It looks like they are intended to be communicative symbols, symbols that mean something other than just an image. So here we get these dots that might be calendar signs, you know, 1 dot for each day. We get these boxes that may mean something else. It could be reference to a dwelling, could be a reference to a way of categorizing something. It may even be an ancient form, an ancient symbol for the memory palace, a way to remember things. This starts looking like actual language. And again, this is tens of thousands of years old. We have something that's this does not look to me like these are supposed to be handprints. It looks to me like these are supposed to be bear paw prints, so representing something else. Maybe this represents the name of whoever this is for, or it represents maybe a specific time of year when the bears are born or hunted or something. I don't have no idea, but it's intriguing just the same. But this right here almost looks to me like upside down Sanskrit. And Sanskrit is one of the oldest languages in the world. So I just think that that's absolutely fascinating. So here we see some more images of cave art as well. So again, for 2 extra credit points, watch this video, and when you write down and when you submit your attendance, tell me what you learned in that video so that you can get the extra credit points. So for attendance, you'll write down the 3 things you learned in this video. And for extra credit, you'll watch Dr. Von Petziger's video and write down 1 thing that you learned there for your extra 2 points of extra credit. All right, is that clear, Nakoa? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's clear.
Okay, excellent. So we look at a lot of cave paintings, but ancient Polynesia, another term for this in the art world, art history world, is Oceania. It's amazing to me how rich this culture is, and it's frustrating to me quite a bit, because up until fairly recently, Western people, authors, like authors of European descent, they came up with the idea that Polynesia was a culture that developed only a relative short time ago, less than 1,000 years ago. Typically, I'm hearing that like 700 years ago, 600 years ago. Problem with that is that there's evidence that there are really ancient things. The Polynesian culture that touched Indonesia created buildings that are so old that today their foundations are under the surface of the ocean. That means that they would have had to have been built when the ocean was lower. Okay, and that means a significant time period ago. So we look at, I guess technically that isn't Polynesia. You know, if we're talking about Polynesia being just this area in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, when we talk about Polynesia, I think of New Zealand, of course, and I do think of Fiji as well, but I'm also thinking of all this area where these explorers sailed to. I spoke with a Polynesian sailor, and he said that one of the things that Westerners just don't get is that he said that he could feel, and other people that sailed like him could feel the ocean floor. So they knew where to go. And a lot of European anthropologists kind of dismissed this and said, oh yeah, they're just watching bird migration patterns and stuff like that. But there is something to that. I mean, this culture that visited all these islands were able to sail across vast amounts of water with nothing but the stars showing their way and find land. Like Easter Island is the farthest from shore of any island in the world. And still there was a whole culture that lived there for centuries. I think that's pretty amazing. So Wade Davis is a Western anthropologist who wrote quite a bit about the Polynesian islands and the Polynesian cultures. It's not one unified culture. Every island had their own biosphere and culture as well. And a lot of the times there'd be city-states, several city-states on specific islands. But Wade Davis is quoted here because he is one of the people that really recognized how truly ancient this culture is. He talks about how some of the ways people were able to sail and find things. So, read through this. I think it's absolutely fascinating. A lot of the Polynesian arts right now come down to essentially story design that we see in tattooing, traditional Moko tattooing. And there's also a lot, tapa cloth, a lot of other kinds of things like that. Designs that are just really fantastic and unique to the culture. You may have heard about the fashion designer that included you know what, I feel like a ding dong. Okay. I thought I was sharing. Was I sharing that whole time?
Yeah, I could see it all.
Okay. Because I thought I wasn't sharing. But okay, that's good to know. There was a fashion designer a short while ago who did a campaign for his sunglasses where the male model, had a traditional mocha on his chin. And that sparked a lot of issues because it moved cultural appreciation to cultural appropriation, where he was ripping traditional mocha, which is essentially identity tattooing, from its intended context and using it as a device to sell trinkets. And so it was rather offensive for a lot of people. And I totally get that. I totally understand that. So this is the quiz for everybody. I want to do a quick preview. And Nicole, if you have any questions on the quiz, hit me up, let me know. But I wanted to go through this. We talk about what is prehistory. It's not the time before human beings existed. It's not the time of the dinosaurs. And it's not the time before history began. I mean, history is always happening. History is whatever happened before us standing here. But when we talk about prehistory as a time period, as an open-ended time period, we're talking about the period of time before things were written down so other people could know them. And you can look through here, and the cave paintings we looked at, go through that. And there were several cave paintings that we looked at, but 2 of them are from the same country. And that's the country that you need to put in there. We're talking about Wade Davis. Just finished talking about him. He's the guy who studied Polynesia. And how those ancient sailors, we talk about Polynesian sailors, and just remember what Wade Davis said about them. A lot of the times we're told that the oceans blocked people from talking to each other. And particularly when I was young, I was told that people were terrified of the open water and sailed so that they could stay inside of land. And that is definitely not true. It's not true because cultures like, Polynesian cultures and same kind of thing in the Mediterranean, the Greek cultures, the Phoenicians, the Vikings, these people knew, since they sailed a lot, they knew it was dangerous to sail within sight of land because you could belly out the boat. And so these guys developed techniques for navigation that are still amazing to people today. Like the Vikings were able to use a specific crystal that is carved in a specific way and polished on one side. What this crystal did is refracted the sunlight behind the clouds to the point where they could get a reading on exactly where the sun was. And they also made devices so if they knew the 2 extremes where the sun might be on the other side of the clouds, they could get a pretty good idea of which direction they were going anyway, even without seeing the sun. So the Vikings did that. It was something that other Western cultures didn't discover for several hundred years. And I'm so amazed at things like the Phoenicians, ingots of copper were found in a Phoenician wreck that went under the ocean waves at least 2,000 years ago. And what's amazing about these ingots of copper, I don't know if you're aware of this, but many minerals and all metals have a unique atomic signature that links them to a specific mine or a specific area somewhere on the planet. So if your copper was mined, for example, in Montana, regardless of whether or not you melt that down and take it across the world, you can do an atomic signature on it and find out that it originated from a mine in Montana. In time period before about 1500 BC, before about 500 BC, copper was mined. A lot of copper was mined from the Great Lakes region in the northwest or northeast U.S. The reason why this is important is that this Phoenician wreck that was discovered about 15 years ago, that had been under the water for 2,000 years, was found with ingots of copper that were and that copper was mined in the Great Lakes region, and that's 2,000 years ago. So what that tells me is that our ancestors really knew their stuff and got a lot around a lot more than we think they did. So the quiz, I hope we've covered whatever that. Do you have any other questions, Nicole, about the quiz? I think most people are doing pretty good on that. If you do not get a perfect score on the quiz, go ahead and redo it and resubmit it, and you so that you can get a perfect score. The written reflection, I'm sorry, I'm going to edit that. It should say, instead of divided mind, it should say prehistory. So I'm going to edit that right now, because what I want you to think about is what you learned about prehistory, the cave paintings and everything else. So, I'm sorry I did not catch that sooner. So we're gonna change that so it reads better. Right. So when you write your written reflection, write it about what you learned regarding prehistory. Now, I don't know if I shared with you before. I don't really mind if people submit something that they've written with ChatGPT. That's not an issue for me. But if you're going to do that, if you're going to use ChatGPT to help you in your writing, do not turn in what ChatGPT has written for you. Go over it and put your own voice on it. And if you are writing a reflection where you're supposed to share your own personal thoughts, ChatGPT will write in the middle of the essay, I do not have an opinion because I'm just a computer program. Nicole, would you believe that last semester I had at least 3 people submit things where the chat program said exactly that right in the middle? I don't have a favorite because I'm an artificial intelligence program. That doesn't work. Oh, that was a prehistory. Sorry. Now on this one, you're going to be drawing with paint, and there are some specific guidelines to follow. You're not making anything, look at what people have done. You're not making anything that is going to be absolutely gorgeous or a masterwork. That's not what we're going for. What we are doing is, just like those cave artists did, taking designs and repeating them, we're going to be playing around with the ideas of repetition and variety with very simple colors. And I really like this example right here because a person has made something, it looks like almost like an open bag, you know, the profile of an open bag, but it is almost a triangle shape that's kind of looping. And they didn't make circles, they didn't make crosses or anything like that. What I want you to see about this is that it's essentially the same shape repeated over and over again, but the artist turned it in different directions. They did different sizes of it. There's some of these that have a lot more paint, like this one is really dark. And there's others that have a lot less paint, like this one is really light. So when you do this, look at the time requirements, spend about that much time on each of these paintings, and just keep layering the same kind of design. If it's a stroke, if that's a dot, whatever, it doesn't matter. And as long as your stroke or dot or squiggle is inspired by something that you see in an image from nature. Like say you look at an elk and you want to do a line that kind of mimics one end of the rack, you know, their horns, then go ahead and do that. And then just on your paper, just paint that same design line over and over again. So just follow the directions on here. And you'll need to do it. You'll need to do a total of 5 of these. And each of these should take a certain length of time. And let's see, let's look at the rubric, 15 minutes for each of these 5 drawings. And now that 15 minutes includes you looking at it, you overlapping the things, and just kind of exploring and figuring out the design or the little squiggle that you want to do from the image. It includes all of that. So this whole project should take you a little bit over an hour. And some of the things you can do, you can just use one color on a page and just have different darkness and lightness of that color. Or another thing you can do is maybe you're doing an image like this and then you want to switch it up and go to a different color, or lay it over again and do that again with the third color. You can do that too. That is totally fine. You can use multiple colors to do this. And the page size for this is only 8.5 by 11. So you don't have to do anything tremendously large. All right, any questions, Nicoa? Oh, it looks like he's gone. I'm sorry, I was not paying attention. If you have any questions about this, let me know. But it seems to be a pretty straightforward project to do. So please understand that the point is not to make a masterwork. The point is not to do something that everybody else will be flabbergasted at your raw talent that you're displaying. What it is I want you to experience this and make sure that you follow the time requirements. All righty. Well, that's pretty much all that I needed to cover this time. I should hopefully be caught up with grades by the end of this next weekend. That's what I'm hoping for. I want to make sure that everybody knows where they're at. And if you have any questions about assignments and things like that, please contact me and let me know. I know that this week's meeting was pretty short. I'm hoping that you get quite a bit out of this weeks of work, at least conceptually, and at the very least, gain some respect for our ancestors. It is really important for us to realize that just because our ancestors did not have cell phones and polyester shirts did not mean that they were stupid or uncultured. As an example of this, we're talking about non-literate societies. If you were a young person living in California, Northern California, before the Spanish and the other Europeans took over the area, colonized it, by the time you were 17 or 18 years old, and I got this from an article that was written by an anthropologist, and from other things that I've read, it seems really plausible. By the time you were 17 or 18 years old, you already could speak 4 or 5 languages. You could communicate with hand signs and 3 other styles of doing that. You could write in rebus to communicate, and you could even keep contracts using something called knot language, which is where people would have several different strings hanging down from either a stick or a piece of leather, and you would tie the strings together so it looked kind of like macrame, but it would be done in such a pattern so that you could actually record a contract or a message to deliver to somebody else. So this is a couple hundred years ago. These people were not literate like we would recognize. They didn't have a written alphabet, but just the facility to be able to communicate in so many different ways is astounding. Another example is Aztec messengers could take messages over an area of 1,200 miles faster than any of the postal services today. That is pretty astounding to me. And on the Great Wall of China, before cell phones, they had a signaling system set up with signal fires so that a person could let people know that there was a message and sometimes what the message was using just the fire. And as soon as you saw one fire get lit, you would light yours and the message would continue down the length of the wall. But about 10 years ago, somebody measured how fast that took compared to somebody with a cell phone, and they found out it actually took longer for the cell phone signal to go the same distance as it did for people to communicate just with the fire. So there, again, the point is our ancestors are just as smart as we are. And in some cases, they could have been smarter. And because other people don't look like us or use the things that we're comfortable with, maybe they don't have Nutter Butter cookies or Kool-Aid, it doesn't mean that they aren't as smart as us, and it doesn't mean that they don't have other things that fill the same needs. So think about that and have fun doing this project. And I look forward to visiting with everybody next week. Thank you.